introducing our guest speakers today, Sophia Sun and Don Kim. I would like to thank them on behalf of APIA and the University of Idaho for taking the time to come and speak with us today. And as someone who is always looking for new podcasts to listen to, when our club president, Anna, brought up Sophia and Don's podcast, Bamboo and Glass, I was immediately intrigued and began listening to their episodes. And I found that I really enjoyed that I could really relate to their stories and conversations, not only as an Asian American woman, but as a young person just trying to navigate the world through the process of constant learning and unlearning, which is what their podcast is actually all about. So Bamboo and Glass is about Dawn and Sophia, two Asian American women sharing the underrepresented perspectives that are shaping their lifelong journey of learning and unlearning. On it, you will hear Asian Americans reckoning with their place in the world and discovering the abundant possibilities of who they can choose to be. You should listen if you've been searching for the right words or inspiration to start important conversations with yourself or loved ones. They are available on all podcasting platforms and on YouTube. And you can follow them on Instagram at Bamboo and Glass for a more personalized episode recommendation. And to introduce our two guest speakers, we have Dawn, who is a Korean American storyteller currently drawn to the medium of filmmaking and podcasting. She's pursuing an MFA in film and TV production at the USC School of Cinematic Arts, while co-hosting and co-producing Bamboo and Glass. Before USC, she worked as a software engineer at Google, working on various products such as Jamboard, Google Slides, and Google Earth. Her vision of an empowered and liberated world full of joy motivates her to continue unlearning definitions of success that have been taught to her and unearthing meaningful stories about the Asian American identity, diaspora, and multi-generational families. And Sophia is a product manager on Flipgrid camera who empowers learners to share their voice and learn from others in video-based social learning communities. Before Flipgrid, she worked on AR and VR at Microsoft, specifically on HoloLens research and products. Outside work, she loves sharing stories on Bamboo and Glass that expand the possibilities of who Asian Americans can choose to be in all aspects of life. She's currently learning what questions she can ask herself to better understand and manage her stress, and she's proud of her journey of unlearning, needing to be productive to be proud of herself. So with that, let's welcome Sophia and Don as they will share more on their thoughts of current issues and discussion on the diverse identities within our Asian American communities.
Thank you, Mariah, for that wonderful intro. Give me one quick second as I begin to share my screen. All right, so hi everyone. I hope you're all having a lovely day and thank you so much for joining us for this event. It's such an honor to be here. So as mentioned, my name is Talon and my co-host over there is Sophia. We both use she, her pronouns and we're really excited to delve into a little bit of the history that shapes our lives as Asian Americans. And as a bit of context, Sophia and we met while we were in high school and we primarily grew up in Northern California, where Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders actually make up 26% of the population, which is pretty significant. But I think there's still been a lot of learning and unlearning that we've had to do in our adulthood regarding our identity. And we're really excited to share some of those reflections with you all. So to begin, I think it is important for us to take a look at the moment of history we are currently living in. So I would say that the landscape for Asian Americans is already so wildly different from when I was growing up. For me as a Korean, I was always easily mistaken to be Chinese or Japanese. And the follow-up question would always be, so what are you if you're not Chinese or Japanese? But now in current days, there's been significant strides in representation. So for example, if you were following the Oscars over the weekend, Chloe Zhao, the director of Nomadland, won Best Director, and the film also won Best Picture. And just last year in 2020, Andrew Yang was one of the first and easily most recognized East Asian American candidates to run for president. And we also don't just see this acknowledgement and recognition within the US, but also abroad with the global popularity of musicians such as BTS from Korea. And it's an interesting time in the US because while there are these awards and name recognitions, it's also a time of a lot of strife and struggle. So for example, we're still experiencing this pandemic and the pandemic has disproportionately affected the Filipino community, for example. Filipinos make up 4% of the nursing population, but nearly a third of the nurses who died of COVID are identified as Filipino. And with COVID also came xenophobia and hate crimes. In New York City, hate crimes against Asians have increased by 1900% in the last year. And that's just the hate crimes that have been reported from the community. So if this juxtaposition of advancements and struggles teaches us anything, I think it's that the positioning of Asian Americans in the US has always been very fragile. We can be lauded like Chloe Zhao 1 minute, but then stabbed the next minute because of our identity.
Mm. Yeah, so today we will be talking about our identity and experiences as Asian Americans through both personal stories and also historical events. And I think it's important to talk about them together because the expectations that Asian Americans hold ourselves to and the assumptions that other people have about us are really rooted in these specific historical events. And this doesn't excuse any of the awful acts of hatred that we've been seeing, but it does provide some context, and it does prompt us to think about how systems like immigration and media are shaping these assumptions and the subsequent actions. And I know that a lot of the folks here who are listening in are Asian American. So I wanted to address you first and say that we will be sharing some of the challenges that we've experienced, and maybe there are challenges that you've experienced as well. And I hope it comforts you to hear that these challenges aren't inherent to you being Asian. They just reflect how other people perceive us and how those perceptions are shaped by events and media, often before these people even meet us in real life. So yeah, let's start off by sharing some of the challenges and moments of feeling different and othered that we've experienced through our life. So Tan, did you want to start us off?
Yes. So this is such a good question. And, in many ways, growing up in the Bay, there being a bigger Asian American community, it was almost a challenge to think of something, but then also at the same time, there was something immediately in front of my face, which is my name. So I obviously have a Korean name that I've decided that has been my legal name, and that's what I have gone by for my whole life. And I remember growing up, I spent so much of my childhood pouring myself over books and novels and reading about the Mirandas, the Sarahs, the Lucille's, and just wishing for myself that I could have an English name, because the most dreaded question that can ever be asked to me on a day-to-day basis is, what's your name, or what do you go by? And I think it's been really a trial and error of me trying to figure out the best way to say my name without departing too much from the actual name, while also desperately hoping that people can just pronounce my name in one try. And I think as I've gotten older, it's definitely gotten a little bit easier in that I think adults don't really give me looks of disgust or confusion that kids maybe once did. And I've also grown a thicker skin in braving a lot of those conversations when I'm asked to repeat my name like 5 times, especially over Zoom when I am a student in school again. And I think what I've really realized is that something as simple as your name can really hold just so much power and influence over a person. And it's also, in fact, an issue that a lot of immigrants and minorities face. Like Sophia, you have a Chinese name too, but you are going by an American, more common name, right? And so I can't even begin to tell you how many emails I get that say "da." Like I literally screenshotted for you all the different misspellings I've gotten, and this is only just like a little sampling. And I think on top of that, I just wish that someone had told me that my name is valuable and it's my identity. And so because it's literally how I present myself, I shouldn't feel shy or feel embarrassed to correct someone on my name, or to shy away from the question or answer the question of what is my name. I think it is an experience that a lot of members of our community have, of like training themselves to mispronounce their own names enough for teachers and peers who aren't bilingual to not look down at their names or think that they're weird for having that name. I think it's also an experience that a lot of people will second guess themselves in, especially me. I felt this way because I was really scared of coming off as too sensitive about my name or too pretentious about like, hey, like you should say my name correctly. But also it's my name, it's my identity. It's a token of, it's a gift from my parents and my grandparents who gave me that name. And I think it in many ways holds the centuries of heritage and history from the land that my parents left to have a more to pursue their dreams in the land of opportunity, which is America. And so I just hope that people are understanding of that, because that is, even though I'm an adult and it has gotten a little bit easier, it still hurts at some points to have to go through that over and over again, especially when I am someone who is so eager to have connection with folks. So that's a little bit about like an immediate thing that I think has been presented to me as a challenge or a feeling of otherness. And I'm really curious for you, Sophia, what are some instances that you've felt othered for your Asian American identity?
Yeah, first of all, I wanted to respond to what you said about always have like that experience of second guessing yourself and wondering if it's okay to stand up for yourself and to ask others to pronounce your name correctly. It that feeling of second guessing really carries over to so many, in my experience, has carried over to so many other aspects of my life, right? Like if you're used to second guessing something as fundamental and every day as like your name, like what else are you second guessing, right? Like sometimes like
Yeah.
I'm second guessing my ideas at work, and like having to rely on other people sometimes to remind me that like you can just assert yourself, right? Like it's I think being younger and like, you know, starting from a young age, having to second guess. I wasn't second guessing my name, but there are other things that I'm going to talk about that I felt like I had to hide and conceal and play down. Is just like an awful, um, I guess, like frame of reference, an awful default to have to fall back on. And so, Palan, while you talked about how your experience of your name being different from that of other people you were around, I actually want to talk about feeling othered despite having an experience that a lot of other Asian Americans experienced. So, for some context, like Palan said, I grew up in the Bay Area, and a lot of the Asian Americans, specifically Chinese Americans and Korean Americans around me, played instruments, classical instruments, piano, violin, cello. And I felt like there were so many kids whose parents had forced them to do it that it every time I mentioned to someone like, oh, I really love playing the piano, people's immediate assumption is, oh my God, like I feel so bad for you. You have like really strict parents, right? Like, oh my God, like it's just kind of making the assumption that I'm a robot and that I didn't do this because I love it and that I'm just doing it because I'm like one of those like piano whizzes that, you know, that my parents forced me to play piano from a very young age. And so my response to that was I would really downplay this thing that I really loved. And in fact, in my college applications, when that was a time when I could really shine and talk about something that I genuinely loved, it was a time when I downplayed it because I was told if you're Asian and you're good at piano, that's actually like minus points for you on the college application process. And so just think about what that does for you. Like think about something that you love and that's such a big part of you and having to always downplay it because you know that people are going to give you people are going to assume something really untrue and bad about you. And so I think that like this kind of really shapes the way I've talked about other things I'm proud of or other accomplishments, just always having to feel like I have to hide it because I don't want people to see some more traditional accomplishments like studying computer science or playing piano. I don't want people to interpret it in a wrong way and actually feel diminished because of other people's interpretation. And it also kind of hurt because I felt like despite me putting so much effort into it, this is something that people really discounted. People just thought, oh, I mean, you're Asian. So many Asian people play piano. I guess Asians are naturally good at playing piano. So like, you're just like everyone else. Like there was no recognition for the dedication and hard work that I put into something that I love. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say that I relate to a lot to that struggle of because I played violin growing up, and it's yeah, I think it's hard because I think it forces us to feel like we have to distinguish ourselves if we are going to choose something that is quote unquote more mainstream or stereotyped. Like we have to still distinguish ourselves from the pool of applicants or from the pool of Asian Americans when isn't it a wonderful thing to actually have a community where like you do share a similar identity and also share this interest, but other people won't see you that way, so you have to kind of play this game of having to like how do you stand out amongst like the sea of people, because there is this belief that we are like that again, like it diminishes our ability, like the fact that we worked really hard for something and that we are actually very passionate about this craft that we want to do. And so it's something that you and I think about a lot with our podcast as well. Like I think there is some redeeming aspect of wanting to find that unique value in us and being able to feel empowered, but also it can be really discouraging because it can prevent you from wanting to continue to pursue a passion or be curious about something because so many other people are doing it. And so thank you for sharing. And I think with our conversation, it began with the context of how both exciting and upsetting events are juxtaposed in this time period. And so I guess kind of continuing with this angle, I wanted to hear a little bit too about how you've, and now instead of feeling othered, how you've actually felt proud of your Asian American identity. So do you want to go first?
Yeah, I love that you asked that question because I think so much of the media right now is focused on these awful, tragic hate crimes. And I think they're getting the attention. I think it's important that they're getting attention. But I also wanted to take some time and space to talk about like, hey, there are some aspects of my identity and my experience and my family history that I'm so proud of. So you see in this picture that I'm holding a big check, a $10,000 issued to an organization called Education Insight. So this was back a couple years ago when I got to intern for a foundation in Beijing. And I was a grant officer, which meant that I would be evaluating the applications of a lot of different NGOs and nonprofits and deciding how to allocate this limited pool of money to the most impactful NGOs. And this internship was in Beijing. All the deliberation and discussion was happening in Mandarin. And I just felt so proud of being Asian American because my ability to use my Mandarin in this very professional setting reminded me of how growing up, my parents really valued encouraging me to learn Mandarin and gave me a lot of opportunities to learn Mandarin. So I went to a Chinese church where I just like gossiped with all the aunties in Mandarin all the time. I would go home to visit family in China sometimes, and that was a great opportunity to practice my Mandarin. And that internship and seeing the impact I was able to make because I was fluent in Mandarin and English was a moment that made me feel so proud of knowing these two languages, and also so thankful to my parents for making that difficult decision of leaving China, a country that they were so familiar with, and taking on the challenges of being in a different country and learning a new language, because they set me up to be in a situation where I grew up learning Mandarin, but I'm also fluent in English. And so, yeah, you can see a big smile on my face. I was very proud. And whenever I think back on this experience, I feel, yeah, so grateful to my parents.
Yeah, I love hearing that story because I think being bilingual has always been sort of like a double-edged sword. Like you could easily be alienated because you speak a different language with your family, and people can kind of see you as being weird, or why can't you just speak in English? But then I feel like also as we're getting older, a lot of people are so interested in learning new languages. And I think again with like the popularity of like Asian cultures and Asian heritage coming through media and whatnot. It's been interesting to see that change and to be like, oh, I'm so glad that I stuck to my gut, and I'm so glad that I still invested time and energy into something that no one else was really trying to like encourage me to do. Like that wasn't the popular thing to do necessarily. Like you pursued that because that was just something that was meaningful to you. So
yeah, I would love to hear moments where you felt proud of being Asian American.
yeah, so I think ultimately there is the community aspect of being Asian American, which is not to say that we're not, which I think people can easily interpret as, oh, isn't that like the antithesis of what you were just talking about like not wanting to be clumped into like a sea of Asian Americans. But I think there is beauty in being able to find people you can relate to, whether it's in like a common struggle that you have, or a common pastime, common thing that you have interest in. And I think that just goes across the board for anything, regardless of identity. But I think particularly for Asian Americans, something that I was thinking about when I made the short film where the thumbnail I'm showing you on the screen, is that a lot of us are so excited and keen to throw like really huge romantic gestures to significant others and loved ones. Like we see that all the time on media. And we also saw like a lot of promposals happening in high school. I'm sure some of y'all could relate to that, or like flash mob proposals. But I was thinking about how we don't always stop to consider doing an act like that for people in our life who've probably been the biggest advocates, which are our parents. And there are a lot of film or videos that I've seen on YouTube where it showed me that it was a common hardship or struggle and experience that a lot of Asian Americans had, where a lot of people didn't know how to even say like I love you to their parents, and they didn't really know how to have that intimate bond with their parents that we oftentimes see in media and pop culture. Like I definitely experienced that too. I think it took me a really long time to be able to say I love you, and then also say I love you in Korean. And so this film I made was inspired by those videos that I had watched on YouTube. And I think it was just really meaningful for me to create it because the response I got was just really overwhelmingly positive. This was also a time when I was beginning to be interested in filmmaking, but my parents weren't supportive. Like they didn't really understand what kind of drew me to the medium. They thought it was expensive, a waste of my time. Like you have your nice engineering job, like you should just focus on hanging out with your friends. And I sent this video to my mom, and that was one of the most heartwarming responses I got from my mom. And this film, I really just have to give it to this particular project that really turned my parents around, and they ended up really becoming some of the biggest supporters in my career change and in being the advocate of just do what makes you happy, which wasn't necessarily the narrative that I grew up with. And so I'm glad that with storytelling, I was able to create a door of opportunity to connect with my parents, and for them, rather than telling them how much this meant to me, just showed them like how much it meant to me. So this film, I know that you really loved it, Sophia. I'd love to hear too, like what your thoughts were when you were hearing me go through the process and also hearing about the responses that I was getting.
Yeah, what I loved was that it was a story featuring people who were Asian American, but it wasn't like it didn't have to be every single element was explicitly in your face Asian American. Like for example, they weren't all wearing like cheap house, like the Chinese dress or like the Korean traditional dress. Their house wasn't decorated in red. It wasn't like I think there are it's so cool to see stories where there are elements of it that feel very personal and specific to your Asian American experience without every element having to be like something that only Asian Americans can relate to. And I think your story does a really good job of like portraying the balance that you wanted to portray. I also showed this to my parents. I thought it was so sweet. My parents, living in the US, they don't get to watch any movies that kind of really, really hit home for them because I think we talk about, oh, we don't feel represented in media. My parents feel even less represented in media. Like they don't even probably understand English fluently enough to understand a lot of the big blockbuster movies. So for them to see these really subtle gestures and for them to see this love between siblings and with like the parent, it was really fun for them to watch. I was very proud to show it to them to be like,
oh, thank you.
Really
So
fun.
I think it's interesting that for both of our moments of pride, we both mentioned our parents. And I think that kind of ties into this phrase, no history, no self. Like it's so important for us to understand not just our personal history, but also the history that has happened in America, because both of our parents immigrated to America. And so they never really got the Asian American history lowdown. We didn't even get that growing up. And we lived in an area where there was a significant population of Asian Americans. And so I wanted us to kind of touch upon this topic of, since we've had to do a lot of this learning in our adulthood, what are some things that we've learned on our own that we realize, oh, like there's the dots connecting here. And so kind of transitioning to that, I think you wanted to talk about the model minority myth, which I know is a term that's thrown around a lot. So do you want to give a little bit of context for what that is?
Yeah, definitely. So I didn't know this term until I got to college. And what I learned was that this idea or concept of the model minority was created in 1966. It was after World War II, after the awful, just like seeing the US put Japanese Americans in internment camps. And there's a sociologist who created this term to set the expectation that like, oh, if Japanese Americans and other Asian Americans could succeed after suffering such awful trauma, why can't everyone else do the same? Why can't all other minority groups do the same? And so what the model minority myth does is that it highlights the success of one minority group and then blames everyone else for not achieving the same level of success. And I also wanted to talk about like what the implications are of this myth for us today, because this term was coined in like 50, 60, 70 years ago, but it's like still impacting my life today and maybe your life as well. So the concept of like Asians being the model minority myth really shapes, kind of influences the story that I shared earlier of people being like, oh, you're Asian, like anything that you're good at, or the hard work that I put into it is discounted. They'll see like, oh, Asian. So I see so many people who look Asian who are good at math. That probably means like it's not very hard for you and you didn't do very much to get to where you are today. And it also justifies other people kind of like resenting us or putting us down, be like, oh, you already have so many natural advantages from being Asian. It's like we kind of want to like put you down a notch almost. And so not only does this have implications for like personal life, but also like implications on a more systemic broad level. So a lot of times people will look at someone, be like, well, you look Asian, and just assume that they had all of the context or history that enabled them to, how do I put this? I would say that for my parents, they came to the US because my dad had a job in tech. And so he was able to get a special visa where he was able to pursue that career in the US. And that's why we were able to settle in an area where there were a lot of other tech companies, where I grew up with the privilege and opportunity to know what tech is and envision myself having a place in tech. But there are a lot of Asians and people of other minority groups who don't have that context and that background. And so they don't have the same setup or the same opportunities and advantages. And so if you were to take someone without that background and have the same expectation of them, that's really unfair. And it kind of reduces this urgency or this need to look at who is getting these advantages and who is getting these opportunities and who isn't. And can we actually support the people who are not getting these, not getting this support that others might have gotten through the immigration process. And on the immigration, and on the topic of immigration, actually, I think, Tan, you wanted to share a little bit more about this specific historical context that shaped our parents' immigration, especially in settling into the Bay Area.
Yeah, so I think the two events that we are kind of talking about are very closely knit in terms of timeline. So I wanted to talk about the Immigration Act of 1965, which is the signing of it is the photo on the right. And it was reversing decades of systemic exclusion of so many different minorities. The main one that comes to mind is the Chinese Exclusion Act from the 1800s. And also, again, like the internment camps of the Japanese Americans. And so with this act, it actually resulted in a great number of immigrants from Asia, Latin America, other non-Western nations to come to the US. And that was really unexpected for people. But this was also a very strategic move. So Kennedy was the one who really pushed for this too. And it was because he believed that by proving that the US was actually this land of opportunity, the superior country, it was a ploy to show that the values and the political values that US holds is superior to communism and superior to other nations at the time, like during the Cold War. And so because of that, there ended up being this influx of post-1965 Asian immigrants coming to the US. And also it led to the sentiment of xenophobia of a lot of people accusing Asians of trying to take over or exploit their communities. You'll also probably hear the statistic that Asians are more likely to work in science, finance, information, and healthcare compared to other immigrant groups or other minorities. And because of that, again, many Americans believe that we're high achievers. We are obviously good at math and STEM fields. But really, these stereotypes, I feel like, really ignore the fact that this was, again, a very strategic decision made by the US, because in order for the US to be the superior country, then we need to build up the businesses. We have to build up the economy. So what do? Then we invite immigrants who are of high skill, who are of these high caliber jobs, so that we can build up the workforce that we might be lacking. And so that's actually why, like, both of our parents ended up working in tech. That's why Silicon Valley is a huge business right now. And I think how this impacts me now is that I grew up only ever thinking STEM was the career path for me. I had never entertained any other career path. Even though I was a violinist, I was like, okay, I'm not going to be a violinist. I'm not going to do anything creative. And it's because I never saw anyone else pursue anything other than engineering and being a doctor. And so when I was, trying to be a filmmaker, I realized, like, hey, I didn't even realize that this could even be a career. Like, there are people behind the camera who are making these films, but there was no one in my circle or in my network who could have shared that possibility with me. And it was only through the internet, like through the age of information, of being able to see people like Wong Fu, other YouTubers, digital content creators, that I was like, oh, maybe this could be something that you pursue. And so that was really a big part. That was a really big aha moment for me, to connect like, hey, this historical event that happened the year that my dad was born has impacted the way that I had viewed my trajectory of like what success can look like, or what my future could look like. Sophia, for you, how do you feel like it's impacted you now that you understand these connections? Like, how do you choose to show up in the world now as an Asian American?
Also, Tan, our dads are the same age. I'm just realizing.
Oh wait, really? Oh, that's so funny.
Yeah, my dad was also born in 65. I think it makes me very how do I say, really understanding the importance of creating conditions, like contributing to the creating of conditions where other people can thrive as well. Like my parents definitely had their challenges when they immigrated to the US, but they were supported and really propelled by this law that attracted them to the US. And it makes me think about, in work today, instead of when I see someone succeeding, or when I see someone not succeeding, instead of just saying like, oh my gosh, you're so this, you must be this, making assumptions about their effort or their ability, it's just like thinking about like, what context did this person grow up with, and what was the type of support that they had, what was the type of support that they maybe didn't have. And also for myself, when I find myself having a hard time at work, having a hard time speaking up and asserting my ideas, it really forces me to think broader than myself and my own actions, and it prompts me to think about like, what is some context and what are some situations and what are some support systems that I might be missing and that I can go after to help myself move in the direction that I really want to go to. And I loved what you said about kind of expanding the possibilities of who you can be in your career. And I think for me, the expansion of possibilities is like expanding the possibilities of like what I think I can achieve by thinking about what context I might want to place myself in to help myself, go where I want to be going. And so I think I also wanted to chat about how our conversations with folks on Bamboo and Glass is shaping this like expansion of possibility. We talk a lot about expanding the possibility of who we can be. And so when I think about like, who am I? A lot of identities come to mind, my identity as a woman. And so for me, expanding possibilities looks like, it is possible for me to assert my boundaries at work. It is possible for me to assert an idea and really stand behind it and ask other people to take it seriously. When it comes to expanding possibilities of being Chinese American, to me, that looks like, even if I don't see other Chinese Americans holding leadership positions in tech, if I have a well backed up idea, it is possible for me to propose them. It is possible for me to just forge my path and ask for forgiveness rather than for permission. In terms of another identity, which is like growing up in a religious household, grew up in a very Christian household. Expanding possibilities looks like telling myself like, hey, it is possible for me to redefine my own moral compass. We've had so many amazing, like compelling conversations with other Asian American Christian women about like the rules that we grew up with and how we're choosing the rules that we are holding ourselves to now that we are adults. And in terms of like another identity would be like child of immigrants. Like one theme throughout our entire conversation is just like understanding the sacrifices that our parents made. And for me, recently, I've been understanding it's possible to acknowledge their sacrifice and to admire their sacrifice, but to also recognize that it's to also recognize that self-sacrifice isn't a requirement for living up to their sacrifice, that me simply being happy and really excited about what I do is enough in terms of thanking my parents for all that they've done for me.
Yes. Oh my God. I want to second that part and say that, our parents sacrificed their, decisions to maybe forego passions in order to support their family. That doesn't mean we have to necessarily do the same thing. Maybe us pursuing our passions unrelentlessly and unapologetically is what would really look like giving back to our parents and what is the American dream, quote unquote, realized. And I think what everything that you were just saying is really a testament to how, we started this conversation about how there have been a lot of wins in the community, but also a lot of losses in the community. And I think there can be pressure to feel one way or the other, but they're not mutually exclusive from one another. Like that is what, like those juxtapositions are what make up our complex and multifaceted identity. And I think to anyone who holds, like everyone holds all sorts of identities, right? Like we listed a couple on the right side of the slide. I think always remember that there are probably going to be people who relate to the stories that you have to share, because your stories are unique but also grounded and relatable. And also, if you are used to hearing, positive connotations or negative connotations about a particular identity or label, maybe take some time to think about, oh, maybe there are positives or negatives that I haven't really heard of on the flip side, on the other end of the spectrum, and to be mindful and to also always be curious to learn and to, again, unlearn the assumptions that you might have grown up with. And so I think maybe with that, I think it might be great to share some episode recommendations if y'all have been enjoying this conversation. We have a few that we would love to recommend to you if you are interested in just learning more stories about Asian Americans or learning or delving deeper into these kinds of topics. So Sophia, why don't you go first?
Yeah, also, I just want to mention that the tone of our conversation right now, it's exactly the same as a podcast episode. I feel like we're doing a podcast episode, except I just see a lot of other boxes and faces and names, and there's some images on the screen. So yes, one theme that we have in our episodes is honoring a wide range of Asian American stories. So I'm Chinese American, Han is a Korean American, but there are so many other types of Asian Americans, right? Southeast Asians, also aside from just the I guess your cultural background, there's so many other dimensions of identity, like your gender identity, your sexual orientation, kind of what kind of education you or your family got to receive. And so we really make a big effort to include a wide range of these stories and perspectives. And so one episode I really loved was by an artist named Corn On. You might know her art on Instagram as Courtney On Design, I believe. And we had this conversation about crafting unapologetically anti-racist designs. So her story is about growing up in Oregon. Her mom is Asian and her dad is Korean and her mom is white, and just growing up mixed race in a place where no one else was mixed race, no one else was Asian, and how that experience growing up really shaped the kind of advocacy and messages that she wants to send through her art. And another episode I really loved is called Building the Cosmos, a digital community of Asian American women. We love Cassandra and Karen. They are just really thoughtful leaders and community builders, people who are intentional in thinking about how can we bring Asian women together in a space that's like really healing and empowering. So yeah, love that conversation. Also love our episode of Quirks of Being Chinese American and Korean American. This is so fun. We were just laughing throughout the episode about funny superstitions, the deep and rich meaning behind our names, birthday traditions. So if you ever were curious about or like wanted to hear about these like interesting quirks of culture, this is a really fun one to tune into. And also how dance saved his life with our friend Matt is probably one of my favorite episodes. He is a queer Vietnamese American man, and we talk about mental health and talk about religion and how all of these identities and contexts shaped what he thought it meant to be, like the standards of masculinity that he held himself to, and what were the standards of masculinity that he was surrounded by. What did he feel like it had to look like to become masculine? And if he didn't feel like he met those standards, what were alternatives? Like, what did he turn to? What were some unhealthy habits that he felt like forced to turn to like make up for that lack of feeling quote unquote masculine? We also talk about how all of these experiences led him to create a dance nonprofit where he encourages other Asian American youth to use dance and expressing themselves through their bodies and through movement to feel more comfortable with their identity and feel more comfortable expressing their emotions. So those are just some of the stories that I'm really excited for you all to check out if you want to.
Yes. So, and then for the second half, I wanted to touch upon maybe some episodes that discuss those historical events or systems that uphold otherness that may be alienating. So, the first two of our episodes listed here with MD, Nahe, and John are part of a little mini series we did focused on international students. So, we can all look very similar, but their experience with their different citizenship status really affected the way that they navigated college, university, the workforce. And I think it was a real-time learning experience for both of us as people who are not currently non-citizens. And so it was really empowering to be able to just hear their experiences and to just have a lot more empathy too, and to think about what compassion you can hold for people who look at you but also could have very different experiences that are very invisible. Our third one is about navigating the workplace, identifying red flags. So Sophia and I started this podcast primarily because we were in the midst of navigating the workplace for the first time in our full-time careers. And I think through the years, we have kind of accumulated a couple of incidents and situations that we found ourselves in that where we had wished that there was someone who could validate that experience for us and validate our emotions and our concerns. And so we hope that, this could be a good primer for any of you who maybe identify as a woman or not even as a woman. If you feel like there are these incidents happening to you, just know that there are other people who have experiences and it's not okay. The next one is the American education, the promises, falterings, and musings, kind of similar to sort of this format of our conversation where we do talk a little bit about the history of the American education, like what was the education meant to accomplish? What was the point of the education and how has that evolved over the years and how has that evolved our decision making around education? For example, would you choose to put your kid in a private school or a public school, especially if you're in an area where maybe public education is more underserved? And so I feel like there were a lot of really great discussions had in that conversation. And so if you're interested in education policy, this is definitely a good episode for you. And then our last one is our first encounters with consent and boundaries. This is one of our most recent episodes with Justine, where she was able to bring up the conversation of consent with us, and they really motivated us to think about, where consent is usually talked about in romantic and sexual relationships, how does consent show up in our lives, and is actually really ubiquitous? Like you sign like terms and agreements all the time when you are starting a new program or getting a new phone. And so it really expanded my idea of consent and how communication and boundaries can really exist in spaces that I had just taken for granted, that there was a way to just get the feel of the room and just know exactly what to do. Like it never hurts to ask. And so that was a conversation that I thought was really, really great. And we have a part 2 to that as well. And so I guess kind of moving into some additional resources, because we are obviously only 2 people and we wanted to kind of just spread the knowledge of, accounts and media that have really influenced us and taught us a lot that hopefully can teach you a lot. We won't go through this whole list right now. We'll be sure to share the slides with you all if you're interested in checking them out. They're all hyperlinked in this slide too, so you should be able to find the URLs really easily. But on the left, we have some Instagram accounts. Like I mentioned earlier, that the age of YouTube was really influential on me to be able to, know about stories that I otherwise wouldn't have encountered. And I think social media has been a really big tool for us as well. And so here are some Instagram accounts that you all can check out. And on the right side, I also include some media, some books, podcasts, videos, shows even that you could kind of take the time to look at if you want to learn a little bit more about the Asian American experience, or just expand your worldview a little bit more.
Yes, and we will stay on this slide so you can take a look at some of the topics that we cover. Oh my gosh, I just love all the colors that we feature on our Instagram, all the colorful, yeah, oh my gosh, I just love these photos of our beautiful guests. Okay, yeah, I just got a little distracted there because I'm so happy. But yes, wanted to quickly share some of the topics that we cover, including creating your own definitions of success, self-empowerment, self-advocacy, self-care, navigating workplace relationships, changing careers. You can hear all about talent switch from software engineering to film, navigating the tension among your passions, values, and needs. That's one of my favorite topics. Dating and romantic relationships, celebrating cultural traditions, reviewing media, beauty, fashion, digital communities. So if you want, you can reach out to us on Instagram. Actually, if you just follow us, we will respond and give you a personalized recommendation based on, you can let us know, hey, I'm interested in number 2 and 3, and we'll be like, ooh, we have sending some personal links your way. So yeah, I would love to now take some questions. Yeah, I would love to hear from you. What are some reactions and thoughts and questions that you might have?
Yes, and you can put them in the chat. And also, if you're again interested in checking us out, there's a QR code at the bottom right corner of the slide. So you could just bring your phone up to the screen and be able, and it should work for you. So yeah, I think that's pretty much it for our presentation. If anyone has any questions, feel free to just go ahead and put them in the chat and we'll just be here.
Maybe we could also chat about some upcoming episodes while we wait for folks. Or Anna, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I just wanted to first thank you guys. I do want to remind people just really quick, maybe as people are like putting questions into the chat box. First, just once again, thanks to Sophia and Don for joining. And for people who might not know, I'm Anna. I'm the president of the Asian American Pacific Islander Association here on campus. Just wanted to thank you guys as well for joining us as we wrap up the month of April and as we're like sort of wrapping up our events that are celebrating the Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month here on campus. While it is fun to have a whole month dedicated to all these cultural events, I just wanted to remind everybody that APIA is an organization that tries to make sure that we do still celebrate all of this culture year-round, making sure that we still try to provide those resources for everybody and that everybody is allowed to join APIA. It is not just limited to members who identify as Asian American Pacific Islander, but that it's also open to anybody who is willing to learn or anybody who is curious. So I just wanted to put that out there and say that also by next week, we will be having a cultural display that will be up at the library for people to look at. So just wanted to plug that in really quick.
Fun. Oh my gosh, you're making me miss college so much.
Sophia, do you want to talk a little bit about some of the episodes we have upcoming?
Yeah, so actually a question just came in. Let's chat about that one first. Okay, what are your thoughts on the common critique within the AAPI community that we only care about representation and not the real issues? This is a good question.
It's a very good question. We actually have a whole episode where we kind of dissect this or unpack this a little bit. I think that's episode 118, because we were thinking a lot about this with regards to being, I guess, sort of content creators by being podcasters. I'll just speak for myself on this first, is that I think that it's a balance, right? Like you can care about representation, but you can also care about real issues. I think the reason that so much of the conversation around the Asian American community is on representation is because that's the most visible. Like that's what people will immediately go start talking about. People like to talk about media, entertainment, and it's undeniable that it is a huge influence in how people perceive us. But that's not to discount the fact that there is real community work, community organizing that is happening, and that there are real, struggles that people face. And I think there is a balance of like, okay, how can we all do our best to contribute our time and effort to uplifting the community in a I guess, a more hands-on way, but also how to continue to elevate the voices that are doing the work, doing the storytelling to bring more visibility to the Asian American community. And I think that's always going to be a hard balance. And I think it's not a one size fits all. Like everyone has their own way of doing advocacy. Like some people are very active on social media. Some people want to share a lot of their anti-racism content on there. Some people are not really used to social media and that's not their go-to, but that doesn't mean because they're not posting on social media that they're not doing the work behind the scenes. And so I think ultimately being, like, again, having empathy and compassion for everyone and just to focus on yourself, focus on like what are you doing and what is your expectation of what a contributor to the community or what uplifting the community looks like to you, because everyone has their strengths and abilities, and it's just about how do I exercise those and flex those for in order to create a better world for everyone. But Sophia, I'd also love to hear your thoughts as well on this question.
Yeah, I think representation in media is talked about so much because that's a lot of times people's first entry point into feeling othered is like, oh, why am I the only person in the room who is Asian and enjoys eating Asian food? Like, I wish I could see more people in media like that. So I think it's like I can understand why it's a lot of people's first reaction. I think it's important to understand the potential and also the limitations of media representation. I think there's a lot of potential in media representation, helping other people see, just like realize that our experiences, the types of food that we like to eat, the types of families we grow up in, are very normal, and that those structures and preferences are things that should be like supported. And so I think that is one power of media representation. I think though that media's representation doesn't solve all the problems. I think even if you had a movie about the really unfair immigration laws and citizenship laws, I think that can raise awareness, but until people are actually really changing their minds about who they vote for and what policies are actually being passed, those laws aren't going to change, right? So I think it's both like, hey, it's so awesome that you're understanding the power of media representation and that you are advocating for more media representation, but also to acknowledge that if we want to see the changes that are actually driving our desire for more media representation, there are so many other things that we could do as well.
Yeah, I think just as like a ending note, it would be that if you are a big advocate of the Asian American community and you are, talking a lot about media and entertainment, maybe also take the time to think about, what are some other areas that you can learn about that aren't, maybe in the spotlight, because that's the whole point of representation, right? Like spotlighting underrepresented narratives and stories. So the things that are happening in media aren't the only things that are happening in the world. So but that's a great question. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. As we wait for other questions, like please feel free to ask us anything. It doesn't have to be about this topic. It could also just be about our personal lives, like about podcasting. We're open to anything. But maybe Sophia,
red flags in the workplace, we're down to talk about that too. I mean,
yeah,
that's the stuff I wish I heard when I was in college.
That's true. But I guess in the meantime, Sophia, do you want to maybe share like one episode that you're really excited about promoting in the future?
Yeah, so the podcast has been a great way for me to meet Tan's friends and for her to meet my friends. And on this topic of understanding the context of our upbringing, we are actually going to each chat with a childhood friend and reconnect with them, see what their life has been like since we were friends back in high school. And so I'm excited to learn about your friend, Tan, and I'm excited to introduce you to my friend who is, of all the people that I grew up with, I think she's the most different from me. Different in personality, different in goals, different in like the types of pressures that she puts on herself and that other people put on her. She is quite an interesting person. So I'm excited for you to meet her.
Yeah, no, I'm excited to listen in asynchronously to your episode. Another episode that I am excited about is an episode that we actually got to record in person with one of my friends. She is also a fellow Asian American woman, and I think something that is unique about her experience is that she actually is the younger sister to a brother who actually is disabled. And so she basically grew up her whole life with this expectation and the role models of her parents being caregivers and knowing that, at some point that responsibility is going to get passed off to her. And so especially when the narrative around Asian American women, or the expectations that tend to be placed on Asian American women, is that you are the person who takes care of the household, you are the one supporting everyone, using a lot of emotional labor. You are someone who might not be able to share what's going on in your household because it's taboo to talk about your personal matters. It was a really touching conversation to have with Rachel in order to just understand a little bit and to give her the space to share an experience that she honestly doesn't get to share that much, because it it is something that is very emotional, but also something that's very personal to her. So I'm very proud that we're able to, hold the space for people to share such vulnerable stories. So those are just 2 episodes that you all can look forward to. But I see that there are a couple of questions that have come in. So I'll read the first one. From Anna, with this increase in attention towards the AAPI community and with your platform, did you ever feel like you were obligated to speak out and use your voice to highlight certain issues in fear that this attention will quickly go away? Sophia, would you like to take this?
Definitely. But for me, it's also been a good sense of urgency to push me to like really learn as well. Because I think we are careful about before we share anything on social media, we want to look into it and really think about it first. And so even though it's been exhausting and really sad, I think this is what's the hate crimes that are happening and the reason behind those hate crimes, I think I really want to understand. And so it was a good time for me to also feel that urgency to learn myself.
Mm-hmm. I think that's a great answer. Do you want to ask the next question?
Yeah. Okay. How do we open up the conversation about what is going on in our community with those who don't understand? What I mean by this is that there are those who don't support us and do not see what's going on with our community is wrong. That is very hard.
It's very hard. I think I think in some ways, like there's different ways there's different kinds of advocacy that happens in terms of different attitudes that people have when being an advocate for the community. Some people are very compassionate with their labor and their love, and they go out of their way to hold space for conversations with folks who may be a little bit more privileged, who are not quite understanding what's going on. And there are other people who prefer to hold their boundaries strong and realize that, there's been a lot of educating that I've had to do growing up and in a lot of the spaces that I occupy, and to have to do that another time that's not where I would like to spend my energy. And so I think it is, again, a very tricky balance. It really goes to say that a lot of the labor that people put in goes underappreciated. There's a lot of emotional labor that comes with listening patiently and to be able to be creative in the ways that you share your experiences in a way that people can relate to and people can understand, because there are different things that will resonate with different people, right? And so I think with opening up the conversation about what's going on in our community is, a lot of times it just takes time. It's like movements don't happen just overnight. And I think there is some resilience in our community as well, and resilience and patience that comes with, the changes that can happen. And so I think ultimately it is, it's hard, but also just know that there are communities out there who are here to support you, like Sophia and I are here to support you, and talk and just bounce ideas off of how you can open up the conversation even more. And so I would say that there are, like, for as many people as there are who may not support you, there's also many other people who will support you wholeheartedly.
Yeah, I would also say that I'm sorry to hear that there are people around you who don't support. I also wonder if it's possible that there are people who are curious and who do care, but have no idea how to approach you about it and don't know how to express that care. Because I personally know that, like, when the hate crimes against Black folks were happening, even with my Black friends, I was like kind of afraid to bring up the topic because I just didn't really know how to have that conversation. And so I would say one thing you can do is share some, if you don't want to share your personal experience, totally valid. What you could do is share, like, hey, here's an article that really resonated with me. This is something that, without me having to disclose what I personally am going through, it's like, here, this is a proxy. If you wanted to know what I'm experiencing, here's a proxy for what I'm experiencing. And I encourage you to take the time to read it and just, hope that they do care. You made that step in making that resource available, and that's kind of all you can do. If you're looking for a community, I would encourage you to go look at our Instagram page and go look at the people who we follow. I mean, we're not the only Asian American podcast. There are a lot of other ones out there. Would encourage you to look at the pages that you feel like you are learning from, that like resonate with you, follow them. And I feel like for me, just surrounding myself digitally with people who I feel like are sharing that same experience has made me feel a sense of support. So, I'm sorry to hear. Good luck.
The next question is a fun one, I think. So despite being of different backgrounds, I find that many children of immigrants and their families share a lot of similarities. What are some similarities you guys have with each other as first-gen Americans? So we both played, okay, first one, we both played classical music growing up. I would say that's one experience that we shared together. I'm trying to think. We both worked in tech at some
Love the food that our parents make.
Both love the food that our parents make. You can't find a duplicate anywhere else. And I think food speaks a lot, is a big love language in our families as well, of, you know, that their generosity in ways that they might not be able to express in words to us on the fly. Do you have another one in your mind, Sophia, of a similarity?
Yeah, I think our parents are both now becoming more and more open-minded to our creative pursuits. I think when I first told my parents about my podcast, they were like, oh, I told them very early on, they were like, oh, okay, we don't really know what that is. But now they're like asking me like, oh, how's your podcast? Or like, how's Todd? What are you guys talking about? So that has been really sweet to see. Let me see what else. I think there's also this, I think both of our dads work in tech, and I think there was, well, I'm not really sure if this is, I think this might be a similarity, but I've always felt encouraged by my dad to pursue tech in a way that made me feel like, as a woman, I can do this and I can succeed in this field. So I really appreciated that.
Yeah. I'm an only child. I personally have never felt my parents belittle or make any comparison to me to like a boy or a male counterpart. And so I'm very thankful that they were always very supportive of me. They really were like, you can do whatever you like, you should be able to do whatever you want. Like you're capable of doing whatever you want. So I really, really appreciate that. Yeah. But I think we have one last question from Jessie. Thank you for the question. Can you speak to the relationship or the tension between assimilation and upholding cultural traditions, especially for immigrant families? So I can go first because I think a way that my experience diverges a little bit from Sophia's is that I actually moved around a lot. I've lived in the Bay Area where there is a big Asian American population, but I've also lived in areas where I was the like only Asian American, Korean American in the area. And so I think when I was younger, I definitely was, especially because of my name and just how many like weird looks or comments I would get about my name. I was really intent on distancing myself from my heritage and my culture. I distinctly remember in middle school yelling at my mom in the parking lot because I was like, you should be talking in English. Like, why are you talking to me in Korean? Like, we should be able to talk this way. And I think there's guilt, I think, on both sides of like, you know, my parents probably feel like they weren't able to provide for me in the way that they would like to, as well as they maybe could have in a country where they are more used to the systems and more used to the language as well. And so I think now, I'm really eager to reclaim my identity, my heritage, and my culture because that's something that's, you know, gone so unnoticed. I didn't have like the equivalent of Korean school as much as Sophia did with Chinese school. And so there's a lot of learning that I am getting used to do. And it's actually been an opportunity for me to have more conversations with my parents and just be curious more about their pastimes and their lives. So that's kind of how I've been navigating that relationship between assimilation and upholding cultural traditions.
Yeah, I would say my parents really had the perspective that my time in school, I would be learning American traditions, and my time at home was very precious and limited. And that was because school would be like the default, speaking English, hanging out with, you know, friends who are of different cultural backgrounds. They really thought the time at home was really precious for learning Mandarin, for like learning about Chinese holidays, for you know, summers, for going to China to see my parents, to see my extended family. And so I appreciate that my parents had faith in me being able to adapt to US things, and they just believed that I could do it. And so they spent our time at home together, just like focusing on learning Mandarin and like understanding like family and things like that.
I think this last question is for you, Sophia, particularly. How do I break my parents' stigma about being traditional? My parents uphold that thought of girls have to be a certain way, and they treat my brothers completely different just because I'm a girl.
I experienced this too. I think the way it shows up in my family is my parents kind of excuse or kind of use the reasoning like, oh, boys just need to grow up a little bit more. I have a brother who's 2 years younger, like, oh, boys just need to grow up a little bit more. I'm like, okay, we're 2 years apart. We're not like 12 years apart. We're 2 years apart. So like, I think the expectations should be pretty comparable. Can I think about this question? Are you on Instagram? Can I DM you later? I want to give you one, but nothing's really coming to mind right now.
Yeah, it's a good question. Thank you so much for bringing it up, because I mean, we're learning as much as you might be learning from us right now with the questions that you're posing. It's getting us to think. And so we really appreciate the time that you've all taken to spend with us. And I see Anna's video is on, so I think we're going to close now.
No, yeah, I just do want to point out that it is already past 6, and so that people that need to go, they are free to go. I'm very excited to see that Lena's very active in the chat. She is actually a member of APIA, and so for other members in APIA that are in this call right now, we do have a separate Zoom room that we will be moving to, so that we can have that more like intimate kind of personal Q&A with Sophia and Don. And so for members that haven't gotten that link yet, you can message me right now or message Corinne and ask for that. But as for everybody else, once again, thank you for joining us and for listening to Sophia and Don talk. I really do highly recommend their episodes. It's one of my favorite ways to just like pass time as I'm like doing stuff around the house. So it's just like a great way to learn and be productive at the same time. And so I hope everybody has a great night.
Thank you so much. Bye.